Duh.
So what's this you guys are working on?
You go.
We made a PowerPoint about alcohol, anaerobic respiration, and then now we have to make like a podcast. Have you ever seen her podcast? Yeah. Yeah.
Who's recording? Is that what he's doing
Right now, yeah. We all have to take turns.
Oh, there it goes.
You're playing teleprompter?
Yeah.
Is it
Right.
recording?
I think so.
Yes. The light's on.
Anaerobic respiration includes alcohol fermentation and lactic acid fermentation. Aerobic means requiring oxygen, so anaerobic respiration is the production of energy without the presence of oxygen. Since oxygen is not available, another accepted molecule must be used at the end of the electron transport chain, such as a sulfate, nitrate, or sulfur molecule. Many organisms use anaerobic respiration when there is not enough oxygen available to continue aerobic respiration, while others only rely on anaerobic respiration as their main method of energy production. It is also used to oxidize NADH back to NAD+ to allow glycolysis to continue, or it is used to that sentence doesn't make any sense. Or it is used to remove excess pyruvate when pyruvate levels are too high. There are two types of anaerobic respiration: alcohol fermentation and lactic acid fermentation, each of which produce a different end product but use essentially the same process. They either produce alcohol or lactic acid as their end product. All the steps of anaerobic respiration occur outside of the mitochondria in the cytoplasm. Glycolysis, which is the first step of both aerobic and anaerobic respiration, occurs in the cytoplasm, but instead of the products of glycolysis entering the mitochondria to produce energy, they remain outside for anaerobic fermentation.
Just click any buttons.
All right, so the mechanisms of alcohol fermentation is a metabolic pathway. The process of glycolysis forms pyruvate from glucose. Going from pyruvate to ethanol is a two-step process. So first, a carboxyl group is removed from pyruvate and released in the form of carbon dioxide, producing a 2-carbon molecule called acetaldehyde. Okay. The second step, NADH, passes its electrons to acetaldehyde, regenerating NAD+ and forming ethanol. So the inputs are glucose, ADP, and a phosphate group, NAD+. And then the outputs are the carbon dioxide, ATP, NAD, pH, and ethanol. So here's a diagram. The first part, the glucose goes through glycolysis with the help of NAD+ and the ADP and a phosphate. And then the pyruvate, it creates 2 of them from 1 glucose molecule and releasing 2 carbon dioxide molecules. And then it just keeps going and goes into ethanol. So the organisms that use alcohol fermentation are mainly yeast and bacteria. However, most organisms can undergo alcoholic fermentation. Yeast are a type of fungus that are very small and generally single-celled. Yeast are used in baking bread to create the bubbles that cause the bread to rise. The bubbles are actually the carbon dioxide released through alcohol fermentation. They are also used to produce alcohol as they break down sugars to produce ethanol.
All right. So the second process of anaerobic respiration is lactic acid fermentation, which is a little more simple than alcohol fermentation. So it begins with the process of glycolysis, the same as alcohol fermentation. So 1 glucose molecule is then converted into 2 pyruvate molecules, and 2 ATP molecules are released. And then that's like glycolysis. And it's also NAD plus being converted into NADH, which, let's see if I can use the pen tool here. Nope, okay. But then after glycolysis is reached, then fermentation actually happens kind of the same way as glycolysis, and you end up having 2 lactate molecules, or we know it as lactic acid. So this is the process. It's kind of like the same diagram, except we don't have that like carboxyl group that Caroline was talking about. And this kind of just keeps happening. So the NAD is always then reprocessed in NADH, and then it comes back around again. And this process, like Anne said, is used when like the body doesn't have enough oxygen. So that's when we go into anaerobic respiration. So that's why you see like exercise and lactic acid put together a lot. So most organisms go through lactic acid fermentation, like I was talking about with exercise and stuff. And humans use it a lot when we work too hard and we can't supply enough oxygen. So, when you're running, and that's why you're trying to build your cardio up so that your body doesn't have to go into anaerobic respiration as much and stuff like that. It's also seen in food like yogurt, sauerkraut, kind of like fermented foods like that. And the different pathways is going to be Catherine. So I'm done. Thank you.
I know, I was like, I don't think that's her.
Okay, so lactic acid fermentation and alcohol fermentation are slightly different processes. They both go through the 10-enzyme step of glycolysis, but after that, they differ a little bit in the enzymes they go through. Lactic acid only uses the enzyme lactate dehydrogenase from its pyruvate, and then it becomes lactate. Alcohol fermentation goes through pyruvate decarboxylase and alcoholic dehydrogenase before it becomes ethanol and carbon dioxide. Lactic acid was first discovered by Carl Wilhelm Scheele in 1780. He didn't discover fermentation, but he did find the presence of lactic acid in sour milk. And it was first connected to muscle movement and activity by Justus von Liebig. He was examining the muscle tissue of patients who had died, and he found lactic acid in almost all of them. And there are a couple of diseases, or one particular disorder linked with lactic acid. It's lactic acidosis, and it's caused when too much lactic acid is in your muscles and your body can't get rid of it because you don't have enough oxygen to continue aerobic respiration, so you're constantly relying on anaerobic respiration. And this usually occurs in people who exercise too much or are unhealthy and aren't getting enough oxygen. It can be a side effect of HIV medicine and can cause gout from the buildup of lactic acid in your muscles.
All right, so the mechanisms of alcoholic fermentation. So the process of glycolysis forms pyruvate from glucose. Going from pyruvate to ethanol is a 2-step process where first a carboxyl group is removed from pyruvate and released in the form of carbon dioxide, producing a 2-carbon molecule called acetaldehyde. And then NADH passes its electrons to acetaldehyde, regenerating NAD plus and forming ethanol. So the inputs are glucose, ADP, and NAD plus. And then the outputs are CO2, ATP, NAD plus, and ethanol. And you can see that NAD plus is both an input and an output because it's going in a cyclic form